had a pretty large bang associated with the caution and warning now. Okay, as we have an apparent serious oxygen leak.
4, 3, 2, 1.
Houston, we've had a problem. He's in a roll and he can't stop it. Performing an evasive maneuver. Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here. I think we need to do a little more all-weather testing.
Welcome to space.
Hello, listener, and welcome to Failure to Launch, a space history podcast where we take you through every mistake, failure, and explosion that made modern space exploration possible. We are your hosts, Quinn,
Chris,
and a faint ECM contact with Chris.
Yeah, so how are you guys feeling? How's everyone doing?
I have been speculating for days on this subject after you let it leak, and I am so excited.
Okay, as long as you haven't been researching.
No.
Okay, here's what the listeners are going to see, and the actual title of the episode is Gerhard Zucker and his killer mail rocket.
Wait, it killed people?
his name is Zucker?
Yeah, we'll get to that. We'll get to that. Like every episode we do, we have to start with historical context in order to educate you and the listeners on what, we're going to be talking about.
All right, but I have to say the emotional roller coaster you've put me on in the last minute.
Are you kidding? I thought this was Mr. Clay.
First, you're telling me that this man's name is Zucker?
Yep.
Not a
Gerhard. Nope.
And the first thing I'm imagining is the UPS man with the jetpack.
I don't get that. I don't get the reference.
The first thing I imagine is
that like an American thing? I don't.
No, it's not. He's just being.
The first thing that I thought of was Canada Post boyfriend with his big package carrying arms.
Right,
and
but
he's
why?
Got a jetpack.
That's the rocket mail side. I thought you meant maybe like Zucker was some character from a show or something.
No.
Like, why would the Zucker? Okay.
No, it's just that, everybody loves the mail, like.
That's fair. Yeah. So before this, have you guys ever heard, like before this chat, had you guys ever heard of rocket mail or those ideas?
It was
no,
very faintly leaked to me, but I assumed you were going to talk about it, so I have studiously avoided it.
I quite honestly never gave it a thought.
Just
so aside from me mentioning the episode title to you a few days ago, you have not heard of it, correct?
No.
Okay. So I also need to clarify, whenever I say that, I mean rockets that are carrying mail and parcels.
Physical items.
Yes. Yeah. And the idea is pretty simple. You just load a rocket with whatever you want to deliver. And like most of the time with rockets, the thing you want to deliver is explosives or shrapnel or nukes or all kinds of stuff. But say you want to deliver mail, letters, you point it towards the town or post office you want to deliver it to, and then they recover it and hand it out to all the people in their town. That's the long and the short of this.
I have considered some cons to your idea, but let us continue.
I'm going to tell you some new ones, whatever it is you've considered.
I am not fully confident of the logistical soundness of this operation.
Oh, do not worry. Under no circumstances can you assume this will be sound, but I am waiting.
And this has been an idea for a long time. Like, as long as people have been shooting like big projectiles over long distances, people have been wondering, like, what else can we do with this?
The only sound, given my history of learning in this podcast, that I think that we're going to hear is the sound of disappointed children who won't be getting their Christmas gifts because the rocket exploded.
Or seeing their fathers again. Yes.
Oh, it's like those NORAD things where they track Santa, and I think there was an Onion headline every now and then they do where they report that like NORAD has shot him down.
That's very good.
Yeah, I love it. And like, for example, as far back as like 960 in China, like fireworks have been used as signal flares to help direct armies or send alerts or things like that. But these just like they fly up in an arc and they explode in midair. So they deliver a message, but they don't actually physically deliver mail. Now, the idea of delivering ballistic mail actually starts in 1810 with a German poet named Heinrich von Kleist. And if you're wondering about the poet thing, like he's actually pretty well known for, I'd never heard of him, but he is pretty well known for his novels, his plays, and how he died, which was a weird sort of like suicide pact with a chronically ill woman he loved.
Wait, what?
Yeah. I don't know the long and the short of it beyond some basic research, but it was basically they loved each other. She had a I'm not sure of the exact, but a chronic illness, and they decided they did like a mutual suicide pact.
It turns out he just shot her and then shot himself.
Yeah, I prefer my romantic way of saying it.
Hey, that doesn't.
I feel like when you break a romantic act down to like, oh, I physically gave this person a gift. Like I handed it to them with my dirty, filthy hands.
So happens that the gift of giving, in this case, was a cyanide pill.
This is 1810. Maybe they didn't have that. Okay, so he died in 1811. This idea came around in 1810. And like I said, he kind of moonlighted as an inventor. He had a fun idea, and he was a famous poet, so people maybe listened to his idea. And that was mortar mail. So the idea was that every single town would have both a wide open field and a military grade mortar.
Oh no.
Yeah. That's very aspirational of him.
That is very peaceful of him. I only have one question. How are you supposed to extricate the mail from the mortar?
Okay, he thought of that. So how this would work is if you wanted to deliver mail to the next town over, you'd simply load up a hollow cannonball with letters, fire it at the town, and hope that it landed in the field. The other post office would then go out and find the cannonball, crack it open, and deliver the letters. And it actually gets better, because mortars in the 1800s weren't exactly long range. So if you wanted to deliver your letter long distance, it would have to travel down the chain, getting shot at a town, recovered, shot to the next town.
Aunt Gertrude's muffins didn't survive the trip, unfortunately.
Quote, by chaining artillery batteries into a sort of network, von Kleist estimated that a letter could travel the 75 miles from Berlin to Stettin, or even the 180 miles from Berlin to Breslau within a day. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately for us, his idea never really panned out. It seems like more of just a thing that he posted. He just had a fun idea. People kind of took it seriously because he was famous. And like I said, he talked about this in 1810. And he died shortly after in 1811, depriving us of mortar mail, among other things.
What if it's a conspiracy? What if they knew and they stopped him?
Oh, no.
I routinely use a one-day mail. His idea is suppressed.
Yeah.
Hashtag free Kleist mail.
Yeah, and we could have had it, I don't know, 200 years earlier.
Yeah, free Kleist mail.
Now, it wouldn't be until 1870 that the concept would be revived and applied to rockets, this time by a Frenchman named J.D. Schneider. Like von Kleist, J.D. also wanted a quick way to send messages over long distances. Unlike von Kleist, J.D. didn't want to deliver simple mail. He wanted to save his country. See, there was a little thing going on at the time called the Franco-Prussian War, a war France was losing very badly. How badly, you may be asking? Well, when JD attempted to patent his idea for rocket mail, he did it while trapped inside Paris as it was being besieged by Prussian soldiers. And that is where the rockets came in. JD wanted to take the few rockets the French army still had, load them with propaganda leaflets, and fire them directly into the Prussian lines. He believed these leaflets, which he wrote himself, I need to be clear on that, would convince the Prussian troops to either rebel against their officers or to just surrender to the outnumbered and starving French army.
Look, my adversary, I have drawn us as Wojaks, and I have depicted you as the Soy Jack.
How can you possibly contend this?
They fire it off, and then 5 minutes later, they just hear like weeping and screaming from the Prussian lines.
Just groan and screaming.
5 minutes later, they just hear actual artillery counter battery fire.
Sir, they're charging us. They don't have weapons. They're waving the white flag. Now, you will be happy to know that JD got his patent. The problem was that he got it after the siege of Paris was ended by a different technological marvel. So, not satisfied that the French refused to surrender, and they actually held out completely surrounded and starving for more than 4 months under like constant shelling. This pissed off a man you might have heard of named Otto von Bismarck. And Bismarck decided to literally bring in the big guns. On January 25th, 1871, 40 hyper-advanced Krupp siege guns opened up on the city. 3 days later, Paris surrendered, ending the entire Franco-Prussian War. So yeah, like the rocket mail didn't really have an effect. I love the siege guns because like they were basically the Hiroshima of their day, like a crazy new super weapon that would like shock the enemy into surrendering.
It's like Hiroshima, but you can actually have an on-off valve for it. It's not simply, well, it's happening now, good luck. It's, do you want more of this? Yes, no. You either crank that valve wide open or turn it off.
In fairness, it's not like Bismarck was sending a new message after every shot. Like, they flatten Paris.
It's that, you can stop that. It's not simply you let it go and then it's going to keep it going.
Yeah. French people do not have genetic illnesses down the generations because of this. So J.D. Schneider was the first person to ever patent the idea of rocket mail, but he never actually got the chance to apply it. So J.D. Schneider was the first person to ever patent the idea of rocket mail, but he never got the chance to apply it. That would have to wait until 10 years later on the island of Nuafo'o. Apologies for pronouncing that wrong. So this is an island in what is now the Kingdom of Tonga, a small group of islands just north of New Zealand. Nuafo'o is a beautiful island and was a prime target for European settlers. But here's the rub. It's incredibly volcanic and is surrounded by reefs that make approaching it by boat basically suicidal. Even now, Nuafo'o's small airport handles almost all transportation on and off the island. But back in 1882, this wasn't an option. Before then, the only way for settlers on the island to get mail was to pack it into sealed containers, throw those into the water off the coast, and have islanders swim out to go and get them. This process actually went on so long that the island got the nickname Tin Can Island, which it still sticks today. Now, this wasn't exactly a great arrangement for anyone. The settlers, the postmen, or the local swimmers who were regularly risked their lives for, letters. That's why, in 1882, a local plantation owner named William Travers came up with an idea. What if rockets packed with mail could be fired from ships onto the island? He even had a way to keep it cheap by using surplus rockets. So have you guys ever heard of Congreve rockets?
By Congreve, you were talking about like the very, very early British rockets. Like we're talking barely out of Revolutionary War rockets.
Funny you should mention that. Yeah, so Congreve rockets were a type of rocket artillery that was used pretty much all over the British Empire through the whole span of the 1800s. And whenever you hear the line in the US national anthem about the rocket's red glare, those are Congreves. That's Congreve rockets they're talking about. And we're going to take a quick historical aside here because how they were invented is a pretty interesting story. In true British fashion, they were stolen. See, in the late 1700s, the British fought a series of war against the Indian kingdom of Mysore and came face to face with what they called Mysore rockets. So these are basically a metal rocket tied to a long stick that like props it up for launch and helps stabilize it in flight. And the British troops get absolutely murdered by these things. Like the eyewitness accounts say the explosive rockets were like by far the most deadly weapons the Mysorean army had. So after spending 4 wars getting bombarded with these things, the British captured a few and sent them back to England, where a man named Sir William Congreve, 2nd Baronet, reverse-engineered them in 1805. These copied rockets, which Congreve named after himself and which got him a knighthood, would go on to be used in basically every war the British fought all through the 1800s.
Oh yes, the rockets he stole.
Yeah.
How British.
Can't say they're not consistent, at least.
Consistently sure is better than inconsistent.
And he did invent a little bit. Like you can see the different varieties he had. He made some of them smaller. He made some of them bigger. That's 90% of invention right there.
In classical English fashion, the guy who is in charge is a head and shoulders bigger than the guy below him.
So we come back to our boy William Travers on the island of Nuafo'o. And he realizes that the New Zealand Wars, which had just ended in 1872, left behind a massive stockpile of unused Congreve rockets very close to Tonga. So his idea is to buy these surplus rockets, replace the warheads with mail, and fire them from ships onto the island, creating the world's first rocket mail service.
Oh, that's immaculate.
And this is actually kind of an idea that's still going today. Like a lot of actual satellite launchers started off, like including ones that are still used today, start off as ICBMs. I don't even mean like the R7. I'm talking about like when the Soviet Union collapsed, rocket companies literally bought old decommissioned ICBMs and just swapped out the warheads, and they worked fine. So this is basically that 150 years early.
Oh, shit.
So Travers teamed up with the Tongan post office, acquired a few old Congreve rockets, and set up a test. Quote, the attempts, however, were wholly unreliable, and many mail canisters never reached their intended destination. Some rockets would fly off in random directions while others split on impact, either ruining the cargo or, if they didn't make it to land, exposing it to the spoiling effects of salt water. Not to mention they were somewhat prone to exploding mid-flight. Yeah. What are you groaning? This is fun.
Oh my god, that's what I'm imagining that as.
It's just like you're just watching this like streak through the air, and it's just like, oh boy, I can't wait to get that letter from mom.
And then suddenly it's heading straight at you.
I feel like by today's corporate standards, this failure rate is acceptable. You knew the risks when you signed up for the corporate premium executive service. You know,
It's coming at you.
Yeah, it's like drone delivery nowadays. Maybe it'll get there, maybe it won't. It's out of our hands. So yeah, I don't have the numbers on how often it failed, but I do know that it was enough that the idea died then and there. Tin Can Island would go back to using actual tin cans for their mail. It'd actually be more than 100 years before a small runway was built and islanders could start getting their mail by plane. And after this, rocket mail kind of went into a sort of hibernation. There wouldn't be any big attempts for the next 50 years. But in the 1920s and 30s, rockets started gaining traction as the next big scientific breakthrough after the airplane. Quote, rockets were cool and futuristic. Rocket societies sprang up around the world. Inventors strapped rockets to cars, trains, and boats, and launches could be found seemingly in every large field. Like, this was the next big thing. Like, the rocket, I need to make this clear, in the 20s and 30s, the rocket craze was huge. There were clubs everywhere. Rocketry started to become a new scientific field, and it had big names to lead it. Men like Hermann Oberth, Konstantin Tsiolkovsky, and Robert Goddard, who, like, nowadays they go down in history as the founders of modern rocketry.
One of the saints.
But they weren't the only ones who got in on this gold rush. As history has taught us, as soon as a new science or technology is created, it attracts crowds of grifters, con artists, and charlatans. And that's who we're going to talk about today.
Oh, my favorite group of people.
Our favorite subgenre of person.
You guys know me, and you know all of my stupid $1 million schemes and whatnot. This topic, the Venn diagram of my interests, is a circle. It perfectly lines up.
You may interpret what I'm saying as those cheeky charlatans, but that group of people, or this group of people, is simultaneously my most interesting and most hated group on the planet Earth for me. Because how the fuck did you manage that? And simultaneously, how are you doing this? And one is in great, not necessarily respect, but admiration of,
oh yeah,
you've managed to do this.
What do you mean, Chris? You don't understand? You don't understand how to do it? You don't understand how to get it?
No, I don't understand how people are.
You don't understand the process?
Are you telling me that you don't understand this, that you don't understand the opportunity that is staring you in the face and that you can get in on the ground floor right now? I'm telling you that mail is going to be reinvented, and I'm giving you the opportunity to invest. Yeah, I will sell you a rocket, then you will shoot it at someone else, and they now work for you. That's how this works.
So I can shoot someone. Is that my business opportunity?
That's your, yeah, like you can put anything in it. Like, I'm imagining a scenario where they do the mail rocket and they just come back around to a military rocket where someone has a mail rocket and they're like, what if I want to send a death threat? What if I want that death threat to kill someone? It's just like, what if instead of mail, I put a letter bomb in my mail rocket?
What if I send a slightly militant death threat?
I love the thought that it just goes full circle, where it's like, we're going to take the ballistic missile, strip out the explosives, and put in mail. But sometimes I have to send hostile mail to my neighbor. And to do so, I will put a mail bomb in the cargo rocket, turning the cargo rocket into a
Back
real
into an
rocket.
ICBM.
In this
Yeah.
case, it is just a threat. That is it.
Scammers and stamp collectors.
One of the first people to realize the scam potential of rockets was a Dutch man named Karel Roberti. Again, I'm probably pronouncing that
Wait,
wrong.
it's a Dutchman?
Yep. Were you going to elaborate on that?
No,
is there an
the
Austin
Dutch are
Powers joke coming?
No, it's simply the Dutch are at it again.
Yes, sir, they are. Don't worry, this has a good ending. Roberti did not know anything about rockets. He had no engineering or scientific background, but that didn't stop him coming up with probably the coolest scam in history. He did it by targeting what was then a massive hobby, stamp collecting.
Oh God,
So
yes.
You guys have heard of stamp collecting, right?
Oh, yeah.
No, I have to interject here. If I'm not mistaken,
Oh
one of
God,
the most
you're one of them,
expen-
aren't you?
No, not for that. One of the most expensive objects in the world per gram is a stamp, and that is not supposed to be just a meme. I'm pretty sure that is up there. Like it's supposed
It's
to
up
be
there.
very, very substantial. Like
Yes, the postage stamp worth more than a gram of antimatter.
no, like I'm talking about a postage stamp that is worth more than 100 or 250 grand. Because it's over 100 years old, and it's also a symbol of British imperialism over America.
Listen closely, my hoarder audience. Save as many asinine and mundane items as you can, for they might someday be worth at least thousands of dollars.
Well, for someone in Britain might hoard them. Okay, awesome.
Yeah. So as a hobby, this is technically known as philately. Like that's the correct name. And in the 1930s, it was big. Like it was a seriously massive hobby. The millions of people were doing. And it was profitable. Like I'm talking people made millions off of their stamp collections. If your collection got big enough, you would set up a museum and other stamp collectors would come in and pay to look at your collection. And you can understand with like how widespread, profitable, and like militant fans these stamp collectors were, like just the scam potential.
Yes, a militant group of a weird sub collection.
Yeah.
This has never gone weird in any semblance of history whatsoever.
Karel Roberti was just about the first person to realize that and exploit it. So in 1934, he realized that flying a normal letter on a rocket would instantly transform it from plain paper into a priceless collectible. It didn't matter how far or how high it had flown. If it had his rocket stamp on the front, it was valuable. Quote, philatelists would prepay for the stamps and postmarks that would soon become collectibles as they left the ground in the belly of a rocket. So like he just invents NFTs 90 years early. Like a thing has value because it is unique, and the thing that makes it is unique.
No. Back up. It's not even as asinine as NFTs, because at the very least, with this specific instance, what you are paying for, if it actually does go through, will be thrown into space on a rocket. It will have performed.
Hold on, you do not have that guarantee, as we will get to with Karel Roberti, because you would just get a letter. You would get a letter that had a stamp on it. Does it have a space smell? Does it are you able to taste it and verify that it even went in his rocket?
No, it smells very faintly of hydrazine. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, so like this like semi NFT-ish situation where the letters would become more valuable by the fact that they had been in the rocket, that they would be imbued with some kind of uniqueness, and that he could turn a profit on it. And all of this was very good for Roberti. Remember, he didn't know anything about rockets. He was no Oberth or Goddard. He didn't actually design or build his own rockets. Instead, he just went and bought from a local fireworks company and rigged up a little mail container on top. And to make it better, he also did all of his flights in private, so people couldn't see that he was literally just launching fireworks. This is a part that actually really surprised me, and it is honestly the best part. When his rockets exploded, which they very often did, the burned letters sold for more than 10 times the letters that survived the flights.
Did he convince the audience that the explosion is a rare occurrence, and now that they are blessed by having the charred remains of their letter?
It's going to sound very stupid, but he has a point, or they have a point. Because at the very least, okay, cool, I sent my rockets into space. How can you prove that? Well, guess what? This one got burned. Don't you see
he
the
could have burnt it
burn?
on a fire or something. Like the fact that you get a letter with like a scarred edge on it is cool. And if it's cool, it's valuable and collectible.
I'm just shaking my head.
Yeah, that's why I say I think this is the coolest scam in history because it's literally profiting from failure, and the harder he fails, the more money he makes because people are willing to pay more for a failure.
At that point, though, failures are more easy to prove. Like, yes, look, it has all this shit on it. But it didn't succeed into space. But you see, it was still on a rocket. That's why it has yeah.
I do need to correct you because you mentioned it a few times. None of these get anywhere close to space. Even like successful flights that we'll talk about between towns, they get like a kilometer in the air tops. Oh. These things are meant for like short little
they're still very much ballistic.
They also aren't launched up. They are launched at like a heavy angle, and they just kind of like arc their way along. Anyway, Roberti's operation got so big that he actually teamed up with a local stamp dealer, which is a thing that apparently existed back then, named Gerhard Thulin, to build a front company for selling his collectibles, the Dutch Rocket Construction Company. Thulin's role in the scheme was making more futuristic letters and covering them in all kinds of colorful stamps so they would sell for even more, which they did. Unfortunately for Roberti, his scheme would not last. So do you know how these days we have like these crypto scams, but we also have crypto investigators who go and try and like track down the scams and expose the scammers? Like the one I'm most familiar with is like CoffeeZilla on YouTube, but a lot of other people do this.
Yes, vaguely.
So back then, they had something similar. In 1935, a team of investigative journalists with the Dutch monthly magazine for philately started running articles on Roberti, exposing the details of his operation and labeling him a con man. That blows me away. Like, this is about stamps, and this is so serious for them that investigative journalists are hunting him down and exposing his scam.
The philatelistic con man.
Yeah, like imagine you're a kid and you like lie about the Yu-Gi-Oh cards you have, and then you get exposed on national news. Philately is huge at the time, and this is the biggest Dutch magazine for it. He goes from a hero to a pariah overnight. And because of that, after these articles came out, it was so serious, Roberti fled the country. He left his partners in the Netherlands behind and tried to restart the scam in Belgium. And apparently it worked. If you go on eBay right now, you can find Roberti rocket letters launched from Belgium after he was exposed as a scammer, being sold for as much as $450.
Is that like today money?
That's today money. That's like I went on eBay when I was writing this script, and there's ones on there for $450.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, they're still valuable. People still hunt them down.
Yeah, but the value now is that it's a historical artifact from a time of this grifter's life. Like,
yeah, it's kind of like art. Like it becomes big once the artist is dead. There are now scam artifacts that are valuable because they are part of some old, ancient, and historical cool scam that happened. And that's also the status that Roberti has kind of found in the stamp collecting world.
Like he's just become so much of a scam that he's just self-propelled himself.
Now, Karel Roberti was not the only grifter to try and get rich and famous with rockets. Over in America, a stamp dealer named Frido Kessler had a similar idea. Since he was already a stamp dealer, which is, like I said, apparently a job people used to have, he had a lot of letters. And he decided he could just take his stock and fly them on rockets to make them more valuable. Quote, Kessler formed a company, Rocket Airplane Corporation, and drafted in experts to design a rocket plane and engine. He ended up commissioning 3 in total, and thanks to the lobbying of a local stamp collector, selected the frozen surface of Greenwood Lake, New York, as the launch site. In the depth of winter, on February 9th, 1936, a crowd of spectators trudged through the snow to observe the launch, officials from the Airmail Service and American Rocket Society among them. So the idea with these rocket planes is that they would be launched from a catapult, kind of like the earliest airplanes. And that's where he ran into a problem. While the rocket motor ignited perfectly the first time, the catapult had frozen solid.
This is very good.
On the second attempt, the rocket did leave the ramp, but it crashed after a few seconds. But because he had a lot of people expecting an exciting story, Kessler needed an exciting reason for the failure. Turns out, according to him, it wasn't because the rocket's liquid oxygen had frozen the nozzle closed. It was because of a vengeful engineer who had sabotaged the whole operation. And it was only because of Kessler's quick actions that he had prevented an explosion that would have killed everyone in attendance. And they bought it.
I have to ask, is this the same Kessler as Kessler syndrome? Kessler?
God, no. Oh, this man has no contribution to space history.
There's too many Kesslers, all right?
Also, if it was him, it would not be called Kessler syndrome. It would be called Frito syndrome because that is a much cooler name.
And also, let's consider this is a man who barely skated away from having a rocket nozzle freezing shut on a cold day, as opposed to someone who, proselytized the end of the information age by, hey, don't throw shit into the Earth's orbit. This man probably didn't even understand the concept of an Earth orbit.
No, because also remember what I told you, he commissioned these rockets. He was a stamp dealer. Like, in fairness to him, he never pretended to know anything about rockets.
That's what I'm driving at. He didn't know anything.
I love the idea, though, that like the people in attendance would watch, and they would watch his rocket like fall off the end of the catapult, fly a few feet and hit the ground. And then half a second later, he walks over to the rocket and he turns to the crowd and it's just like, I prevented an explosion. I saved all of your lives just now. You all saw it. And everybody just starts like cheering and clapping.
I was just saying, it would have been better if you just shot it and it exploded slightly.
Now, I'm sure we can all guess that this was a lie. There was no supervillain saboteur. Kessler hadn't saved the day with his quick thinking. His rocket failed because he got it built by local machinists who didn't know anything about rockets.
Because he probably didn't tell them anything, or he didn't know and they didn't know.
But remember, he's a scam artist, and he pulls it off beautifully. He convinces everyone, including a CBS camera crew, to come back later for his second attempt. This next attempt predictably did not go well. In front of a crowd and camera crews, his first rocket left the ramp, flew a few feet, and then smashed straight into the ice. And when they recover it, the damage is so bad that it's a complete write-off. Now with his last functional rocket, Kessler decides to ditch the ramp altogether and just lie the rocket plane on its belly on the ice to set it off. It didn't have wheels or gear or anything. He just let it rip.
Oh.
I hate it!
And somehow, like, this was his only successful flight. It gained speed and took off fine, but then the wings immediately crumpled and the rocket slammed into the ground after flying less than 100 meters. But it was still a success, because technically, it had crashed just over the state line in New Jersey, meaning that it had successfully delivered the first rocket mail between two states.
Thanks, I hate it.
It's the first delivered
That is
rocket mail
it's
across
so
two
worse.
states.
Yeah, but in fairness, it's also because like that lake is literally like split by the state border. So he only had to get it like a couple 100 feet to actually do the delivery. They have a little ceremony at the end where Kessler shakes hands with the postmaster from Hewitt, New Jersey. And as they're handing the parcels back and forth, like they're both standing in front of his smashed rocket, and Kessler does not look happy.
Because it was probably supposed to be a substantial distance from where it started.
And even if he declared mission accomplished and they did their little ceremony, the crowd was not happy. Like they knew that this was a failure and a scam. And in fairness, this is why Carel Roberti did his flights in private. You don't have to deal with the people knowing how much of a failure you are. Frito Kessler, he pulled an Icarus flight by getting a huge crowd to come and watch him fly his home-built rocket. So with such a high-profile failure, Kessler's rocket scam died there. No one else funded his project, and he never flew another rocket.
Good.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but just for this case, good. Just because this was not something that was even near mature enough, and also, God forbid, they tried to use it in anything nearing a residential setting, because, well, we'll get to that, I think.
Now, just because Rocket Mail attracted a lot of scammers and was funded mostly by people looking to manufacture collectibles does not mean that there weren't true believers, people who actually thought rockets were the future of mail delivery. Of them, easily the most successful was a British man named Stephen H. Smith. Now, Mr. Smith also wasn't working in England. He lived in Calcutta, India, where he was a customs agent, dentist, and policeman. And he was also a rocketry fanatic, who had studied it ever since he was a child. When he had the idea to try rocket mail in 1934, he did it as secretary of the India Airmail Society, and he even managed to get like some limited government support for it. He did have to take some money from stamp collectors to fund his flights, but unlike Roberti and Kessler, he wasn't trying to like scam them. Quote, he conducted his first rocket mail test on the 30th of September 1934, using what was effectively a glorified firework supplied by the Oriental Firework Company of Calcutta. The goal was to carry 143 letters from a ship to the shore of Zucker Island, but 140 of the letters were successfully recovered. Over the next 10 years, Smith would orchestrate no less than 270 flights, 80 of which contained mail. He experimented exhaustively with different designs, propellants, and launch trajectories, and is credited with the first rocket mail flight over a river and the first parcel delivered by rocket. And do you want to know the best part? He didn't just fly mail. He also moonlighted in flying animals as a sort of private Project Albert 20 years before any American monkeys would fly. The first to fly were a pair of chickens named Adam and Eve, which he quickly followed up with a snake. You want to guess what the name of the snake was?
I'm afraid.
It's Miss Creepy. He called it Miss Creepy.
Oh, that's actually a lot better.
That's adorable. And that's probably how rocket mail would have died, as a weird niche project funded not because it could actually work, but as a way to manufacture collectibles. But it didn't die, because rocket mail found one more big supporter, the National Socialist German Workers' Party, better known as the Nazis.
Oh, wait, there's more.
No, there's not more. It's just there's Nazis.
Look, the point I'm making is that this could have died as a little niche hobby thing.
Yeah.
And then you hit me but wait, there's more.
Nazi Germany and the rocket craze.
That's right. We made it. And I think this is actually the first time in the show that we really got the chance to talk about the Nazis, except for like those doctors in Argentina. They show up a lot in space history. So this is kind of like a new big landmark for the show.
We made it.
Yes.
We made it. We finally stopped talking about the
Soviets. I found someone worse to talk about. I found a new itch. So, like most countries in the 30s, a lot of Germans got swept up in the rocket craze. Several of these dreamers and kids in rocket clubs would go on to become rocketry legends and future topics of this podcast. Guys like Hermann Oberth, Ernst Stullinger, and Werner von Braun.
Fucking excellent.
What made Germany different, though, was a little thing called the Treaty of Versailles.
So they lied about it, obviously.
So for those who don't know, at the end of World War II, Germany was bound by Versailles to a set of demands that like severely...
At the end of one. You said World War II.
I can't believe I wrote that.
At this point in time, it was not World War I, it was the war to end all wars. The Great War. The Great War. When the Great War ended, Germany was forced to sign the Treaty of Versailles, which unfairly punished them for the actions of them becoming involved of helping a friend.
Oh no, he's radicalizing in front of me. For those who don't know, it was at the end of World War I, not II. I apologize. But Germany was bound by Versailles to a set of demands that severely restricted its military. It had a lot of other effects, but for this episode, we'll just focus on the military stuff. For example, the German army was restricted to 100,000 soldiers. They couldn't operate tanks, military aircraft, or submarines, and they weren't allowed any heavy artillery or solid fuel rockets. Now, I'm not here to talk about whether the Treaty of Versailles was justified. Certainly, it fed into German resentment and a drive for rearmament when Adolf Hitler and the Nazis took power in the 1930s. But what we're going to focus on is that last point, the one about Germany being barred from operating heavy artillery and rockets.
Mom says that you can't play with rockets anymore.
But at the same time...
Mom, I want to be the first guy to invent the mail rocket.
You think they're launching mail?
While the Nazis would later flaunt the treaty entirely and they would just break the rules, obviously, and just say, we're no longer bound by this, and rearm their military with massive numbers of tanks, aircraft, submarines, and artillery, in 1932, even before the Nazis took complete control, the German army was still looking for ways to skirt the treaty a little bit, to operate within the rule of law rather than the spirit.
How German?
Yeah, and if a weapon wasn't listed in the treaty, then it wasn't banned. And since only solid fuel rockets were banned, the military paid a lot of attention to all these new rocketry clubs that were popping up and experimenting with liquid-fueled rockets. One of the earliest examples of this was a kid named Wernher von Braun, who actually started working for the army when he was 19. The deal was simple. The army would pay for von Braun's graduate studies if he agreed to study liquid fuel rockets and work for the army. Another rocket luminary the Germans supported was Hermann Oberth. So to kind of give you an idea here, in the pantheon of big space exploration names, Oberth kind of stands out. He's basically like the Stephen Hawking or Neil deGrasse Tyson of his time. Like he's the science superstar. He's the rocket superstar. While he was an actual like brilliant scientist like Tsiolkovsky or Goddard, what he had was the ability to inspire like hype and cult-like loyalty in the growing amount of like kids and students who followed him around at his rocket club. Like he had all these predictions of, going to the moon and how rockets would change the world. In working for this club, like von Braun didn't just know him, like he worshipped Oberth. Oberth was his mentor. And like I said, Oberth had a lot of ideas of how rockets would change things. And one of those earliest ideas was mail rockets. Quote, he calculated rockets could deliver up to 44 pounds of mail as far as 1,200 miles and be guided to a specific landing spot, give or take a few miles, which, if equipped with secondary boosters that detached mid-flight, Oberth suggested a transatlantic mail run could take as little as 30 minutes, takeoff to landing. So he wants to build like a multi-stage intercontinental mail rocket.
Intercontinental.
Yeah.
You mind if
hypersonic, flying into space, and then your Amazon package slams through your home at hypersonic speeds.
We have to play our favorite game. Is it a nuclear missile or a cargo rocket? You decide. You have 15 minutes.
Turn the key or don't.
How do rockets deal with payloads that are constantly shifting in center of gravity?
If it actually came down to it, they would have it locked down. They would put like foam packing around it to keep it from. It wouldn't just be free floating around the cargo bay. While Oberth never got the chance to build his intercontinental ballistic mail missile, there were other German scientists who did actually build and launch mail rockets. So the first was a dude named Reinhold Teiling, who would actually be credited as the inventor of like the cruise missile. Like von Braun, he was an Oberth acolyte. He'd listened to Oberth give a lecture when he was a kid, and he'd immediately fallen in love with rockets for the rest of his life. Unlike von Braun, he didn't work for the army. He worked for the Kriegsmarine, the German Navy, who were also very interested in deploying rockets on their ships. It doesn't get talked about a lot, but there was both the Army and the Navy had their own little like Operation Paperclip where they were hunting down these rocket club kids to just get them rockets. They were competing with each other.
Do you think that von Braun suggested to the Americans to do Operation Paperclip because he was so deeply impacted by this event when he was younger? He just had to relive it?
If that were the case, I can say right now, I hope there were some other events he looked back on and maybe relived, maybe had some moral epiphanies about. We will talk about middle work at some point, which is going to be grim.
The things that happened distinctly in his era that may have influenced him a bit.
Listen, I'm just saying that he could have just been like a narc, you know?
Did they really... were narcs really a thing at that time, in that period of German history?
They go to the Americans. They do not get caught. Like, they get together and they say, like, all right, who do we go and work for? They pick the Americans.
Well, there's a reason why. It's because, do you want to go to a nice, cushy American Science Institute? Or what's the Soviet version called? A Sharka?
A Sharaga.
A Sharaga, sorry.
But the thing is that whenever they went, there's actually reports that von Braun like severely pissed off the people. Like the dude who did von Braun's initial debriefing, like von Braun shows up and hands him literally a 20-page report on why you should hire me and all the good I will have. And the dude who's doing the debriefing had previously been in charge of like looking over the Mittelwerk Dora factory, and B, like later on he winds up in charge of picking what rocket gets used by the US government. And there is a lot of suspicion in these books that this dude was so pissed off correctly at Werner von Braun as a horrible Nazi that he like, no, we're not launching your rocket. Get out of here, you Nazi.
I was just saying, it very much sounds like it was, okay, cool.
This is anti-Nazi prejudice. People need to be considerate of my nationalist and socialist politics.
Why aren't you tolerant of my intolerance?
So much for
the tolerant left.
There it is. We hit it.
Perfect wavelength.
It almost sounds like we're very much getting into some weird, aeronautical variant of the clean Wehrmacht, the clean German aerospace program. There was very much a reason for all of this.
It didn't exist.
Where were these rockets pointed?
Yeah, that is also fair. Even if they were made humanely, they couldn't target anything but civilians. But anyway, yes. We are still in 1934, and we're talking about Reinhold Teiling. Now, just because he was getting that battleship money doesn't mean Teiling didn't use stamp collectors to get some extra funding on the side. Like everywhere else, German philatelists went crazy for the space souvenirs that would make their scrapbook the envy of all the other stamp nerds, which was a thing, I guess. It would make you very attractive among those people, I guess. You show up with a scrapbook bigger than anybody else's, and everyone else at the philately club just like slinks away from you.
They just bow down.
Now, Teiling's rocket designs weren't anything super high tech, especially compared to some of the other German projects at the time. They weren't literal fireworks, but they were barely a step above. What set him apart was how he launched them. Like I said, Reinhold Teiling invented the cruise missile, a missile with wings that flies a lot like a plane instead of just following a ballistic arc like an artillery shell. He also invented the idea of rockets having pop-out fins that deployed after launch, recovering his rocket, and he invented the idea of recovering his rockets with a parachute in the nose cone. Like, these are things that are almost universal these days, especially in the military. Any rocket that is fired by a military has pop-out fins. During the early 30s, Teiling successfully launched several of his rockets. His most famous was on April 15th, 1931, when he flew a rocket holding 188 postcards from an island off Germany's coast over to the mainland. After this success, he spent the next 2 years traveling the country and perfecting his design for a reusable cruise mail missile. Unfortunately, this is also where our story gets its first casualties. In 1933, while Teiling was working with 2 assistants in his lab, his rocket exploded, killing all 3.
Do you think that's another conspiracy from Big Mail that's
Big Mail
to shut this man up?
That's trying to stop. This is like the cure for cancer. This is like the cure for cancer, but for the mail.
Anytime anyone gets close, anytime they're about to solve it, the Prussians invade their city.
The government's trying to stop me from releasing information about my perpetual motion device. It will solve the energy crisis.
Another scientist in the field of rocket mail was Friedrich Schmiedel. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. Now, Schmiedel wasn't German. He was Austrian, and he lived high up in the Alps. And as you can imagine, because of the mountains, even if 2 towns were close together, getting from one to the other could be a hassle. Like, you'd have to go down the mountain, back up another mountain. Schmiedel pitched his plan as being able to get around long postal routes by just flying his rockets in a straight line from point A to B. And because every one of these rocket mail guys had something that made them special, he was also the first to launch a rocket from a balloon. And he actually did some early rocket flights where he put a camera in it, fired it straight up so that he could get pictures of the upper atmosphere and like study the horizon and whatnot. And especially for what we're about to get into, I want to make this clear. We're talking about him because rocket mail as a concept was a failure, not because Friedrich Schmiedel was specifically a failure. Friedrich Schmiedel was an incredible engineer, and as we'll get to, a goddamn hero. His most successful flight was in February of 1931, where he flew a rocket between the towns of Schöckel and Sankt Radegund. Most of the time, I will never apologize for mispronouncing European names. Europe should apologize to me for naming their stuff weird. I will not retract that. So yeah, he successfully flies it between these 2 towns, and he kept going. He even started what was probably the world's only regular rocket mail service, like not just a one-off launch, between the towns of Hochkreuz and Semriach. Over the next 2 years, several other successful missions took place, carrying hundreds of letters between various towns in the mountainous region. But in 1934, the Austrian post office banned private mail services, and in the following year, the government killed hobbyist rocket development by outlawing the personal possession of explosive material.
Explosive material, because how many things can be made in your fucking sink that can count?
Yeah. Schmiedel may not have been able to launch any new rockets, but he kept designing them. And remember when I called him a hero? That's because after the Anschluss, when Nazi Germany annexed Austria, the Nazis approached Schmiedel to see if he wanted to work for them. They gave him the standard offer that went to all of the German rocket kids. And he responded the way any good man hopefully would, by threatening them with violence until they left his house.
Oh, God bless.
Yeah. Later, after World War II started and they asked again, he responded by destroying his rockets and burning all of his notes so that they could never be used for war.
God's based.
Yes, and he was consistent in this belief. When Operation Paperclip rolled around, he was on the short list of scientists the Americans wanted to recruit after the war, and he turned them down too.
Yeah, are you saying he was someone that understood the gravity of his sins?
Whoa. Well, he didn't really have sins. He just understood that his science could be used for death a lot easier than it could for good.
Are you saying that the concept of ballistics in most modern applications is only used for murder?
It's hard to do good stuff in that field, I'll say that.
You know what? He might have been what sounds like a bit of a shitheel. I don't know that much about him. But at least he didn't take the easy way out, it sounds like. It sounds like we're talking about some real upstanding gentleman. And
now we can go, you say that, after talking about the hero that was Friedrich Schmiedel, but we finally get halfway through to the main topic of our story and the headliner of this episode, the king of rocket mail and the arch scammer, Gerhard Zucker.
There he is, the man in flesh.
Yeah.
The Zuck.
Gerhard Zucker, the king of rocket mail.
Now, there's very little known about Zucker's early life. We know he was born in 1908 in the town of, I'll mispronounce this as well, Hasselfeld in Germany, and that the next public mention of him is in 1931, whenever he bursts onto the crowded scene of German rocketry when it's at its peak height. Because, yeah, remember, it was all the rage back then, and because of the Treaty of Versailles, was very encouraged by the German government. With figures like Hermann Oberth and Max Valier and his rocket car in the news all the time, it was very easy for a charismatic young man to break into the spotlight. And like a lot of people we've talked about, Gerhard Zucker had a passion for rocket mail. Unlike a lot of the actual early pioneers, Gerhard Zucker didn't know anything about rockets. Almost all of his test launches were miserable failures, but that didn't stop him. He had a mission. Here's an example. You guys can see it, but I will describe it to the listeners. It's Gerhard Zucker in 1933, standing in front of what he claimed was the biggest rocket ever built, which it definitely wasn't. Behind him is a crowd of literal Nazi brown shirts. And this wasn't even a test launch. He just showed up outside Berlin with his 5-meter model and asked any Nazi official he could find for 10,000 Deutschmarks.
Oh, boy.
It did not go as expected. Yeah. Quote, in a 3-page CV written shortly before his death in 1985, Zucker wrote that after this lecture, he was taken to a lunatic asylum for a psychiatric evaluation. He described how he was locked up for 2 hours before a friendly psychiatrist declared him sane. The doctor, Zucker later claimed, suggested he should send those who had sent him for tests in instead. Now, that does sound like a fun story, but you might also be noticing a pattern, and that's that he was a talented and shameless bullshitter. He lied constantly. It actually made researching him a lot harder because any info on him is just
lied about everything.
Yeah, and even in well-researched sources, you will find different dates, different numbers, because at some point you have to trust the man himself for the info, and this man could not be trusted. You can't trust him with anything. For example, in 1933, Zucker worked for a train company called Eisfeld that had designed a prototype rocket-propelled train. Not only did Zucker claim he was the lead designer, he also claimed he'd piloted the thing at over 250 kilometers per hour, making him the first pilot of a manned rocket in history. These are lies. These are definite, provable lies Max Valier was the first man to ride a rocket. And I know this because Max Valier died in 1930 when his rocket car exploded.
Man looks like he is ready to go on an adventure. That rocket is literally firing straight into his spine.
So Max Valier, we'll definitely talk about him because he was a dude who basically believed in putting rockets on everything. And he made like rocket cars, he planned rocket planes, rocket trains, like...
Look at this man's face. He does not care.
But like any good liar, Zucker knew to sprinkle just enough truth to give himself some plausible deniability. And I need to be clear, I know I called him a grifter before. I don't think Zucker was necessarily a con man or a grifter. He did lie to people. He pretended to know more than he did about rockets, which was he knew nothing about rockets. But he didn't do really anything to follow through with these scams. He launched his rockets and they failed. He did not get rich off of this. He didn't do like the Roberti thing where he made shell companies and scammed and like tricked people. When people called Zucker a fraud and a liar, he just, moved on and kept going. I really don't know how to categorize him. He had a dream of doing rocket shit and nothing would stop him, which is kind of admirable in a weird way. And if you saw his rockets, you'd call him a fraud too, probably. See, what Zucker did was he bought large fireworks like Roberti did, but then he dressed them up with these like metal fairings around the outside that looked like a trash can with wings. The firework rocket would be like in the middle, and the space around it, which he also packed with asbestos, formed a little cargo bay for the mail. Even put a little spring in the nose cone that he thought would completely soften the landing.
Oh yes, this tiny little fucking spring I got out of the nose of a pen. Perfect.
Yeah.
All I need.
I hope you like your mail covered in fire retardant.
They thought asbestos was fine back then. They brushed their teeth with the stuff. You do not need to be a rocket scientist to know that these were incredibly stupid ideas. But like I said, he just moved on to another opportunity. When even the Nazis wouldn't fund his dumb project, he just found someone else who would. His dad. Gerhard convinced his dad to sell a chunk of the family farm to fund his launches. And he used that cash to go on a tour of Germany, setting up dozens of disastrous test launches.
Perfect.
Dad, I need some money. What are you going to do with it? Burn it. Really quickly, Gerhard Zucker went from a crank the Nazis could ignore to a legitimate real risk. His launches and charisma started to attract international media, and the Nazis were worried Zucker would single-handedly embarrass the whole nation when his rockets failed. They approached him, the Nazi government approached him and tried to convince Zucker to stop his launches. He did not listen.
Big Mail is trying to stop him. The system is trying to put him down.
That's it. Things got stupid and the man escalated.
This is what I mean about him not being a grifter. I think he's just a weird dude with a dream. The Gestapo comes to his door and is like, hey man, you need to knock it off. And he's just like, yeah, sure, whatever.
He's just
I'm going to do it tomorrow. Quote, Zucker fired his missile on the 9th of April, 1933, near Dunhan on the North Sea coast. According to one contemporary journalist, the large crowd who turned out to watch burst out laughing and mocking laughter when his rocket belly flopped into the Cuxhaven mud flats. Zucker blamed the ballistics experts who supervised his experiment and demanded that he reduce the amount of igniter fuel by half. Zucker had packed enough, they said, to propel his rockets to Helgoland, 70 kilometers off the German coastline. Zucker planned another flight 4 days later, which would carry a mailbag of postcards that had been stamped with the message, sent by dirigible mail rocket Hertha, System Zucker. But the authorities forbade him from making any further demonstrations. Now, you might think that this would put an end to his experiments. After all, the goddamn Nazis banned him from making any more launches.
No, he's crazy. Absolutely not.
No. He just finds somewhere new to launch his dumb rockets. Ideally a place where no one knew him or knew what a liar he was. So in 1934, he attended the Apex International Airmail Exhibition in London.
The Nazi goes to London.
Exactly. Well, he escapes the Nazis to London. Here's the best part. He was actually invited as a guest of honor. Because rockets were all the rage, the conference invited anyone with even the tiniest bit of name recognition. And they did it apparently without checking to see if they were massive con men and failures. I do have to recognize Zucker is good at convincing people. He has a weird cult leader sort of charisma. And he uses it whenever he gets to this conference, he uses it immediately to impress a British stamp dealer named C.H. Dombrowski and convinced him to become the joint founder of a new company. Like then and there in this weekend conference, he just goes like, hey, want to start a company with me? And that's how the British Rocket Syndicate is born.
The British Rocket Syndicate.
The BRS. It does sound pretty like evil.
No, it doesn't sound evil. Like, it sounds like the most vanilla named company you can for that time.
I don't know. Maybe I'm just a sucker, but I like the word syndicate. Syndicate sounds cool to me.
Suckers for Zucker.
He is an amazing networker, is what he is. Like Dombrowski would become the part owner of this company with Zucker, but he did like 90% of the funding. He funded almost all of it. Without government support, he had to rely entirely on the British philately community. This actually worked out really good for him because these stamp collectors had been reading about all of these rockets that could make them rich for a few years. Like, because there was all the rage going on all around the world, in America, in India, in the Netherlands, in Germany, but there weren't really any homegrown British rocket mail projects. So these guys were like already primed to want his product. Zucker would later write in his typical grandiose style, quote, all that I was refused in Germany, I was to become in London. When talking to investors, he'd say, quote, if successful, the stamps will be very valuable. Some stamps sold in Germany 3 months previously are now worth £100. What he didn't tell them was that those were the failed flights that had exploded. Now, at the Apex conference, Zucker made another lucky find. He met a fellow German expat, the logician Robert S. Hartmann. At this conference, Hartmann was just working as a photographer, but the story of his life and how he came to be in London is actually really impressive. So before, while serving as an instructor of administrative law in Berlin, Hartmann, who was Jewish and who was violently anti-fascist, made a name for himself waging a one-man war in print against Adolf Hitler. When the Nazis came to power, he barely escaped arrest by hiding in an insane asylum and fleeing the country with a fake passport. He was an incredibly accomplished man, and he would go on. He invented, I'm not I don't know a lot about logicians, but he invented something called the science of value that is apparently pretty well respected. And he actually got nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize in 1973 for his efforts against the Nazis. Unfortunately, no matter how awesome this dude was, he also immediately fell victim to Zucker's famous charisma. I'm going to quote from Hartmann's autobiography called Freedom to Live, and you tell me if you notice anything weird. Quote, on a routine photographic trip to the opening of the London Air Post exhibition, I met Gerhard Zucker, a young German who had invented a rocket, the forerunner of the lethal German V-2 rockets, and of the rockets of today which are taking man into space. Zucker wanted his rocket to be used to carry mail. Hitler, he said, had wanted to use the rocket to deliver bombs, and he couldn't go along with that, so he got out of the country. I liked the guy, and he liked me, and I agreed to serve as his publicity man. Did you notice anything about that story?
Yeah, there were a few embellished details here and there. You know, it's mostly true.
Yeah. It starts in Germany and it ends in London. What more do you want?
You start mentioning various historical figures and that they liked your product, and then suddenly, hey, I don't like how it's being used. Why did you suggest your product? Did you think they were going to be delivering surrender leaflets?
It's just that he is such a liar. Like,
exactly.
he tried to work for the Nazis. The Nazis turned him down because he was insane. And he then, like, in talking to Hartmann, he pretended that he was like the ultimate rocket guy. He stole the credit. He stole von Braun's credit, and this worked. Like Hartmann becomes the publicity man for the British Rocket Syndicate. And with someone to fund his project and a literal anti-Nazi philosopher as his PR guy, Zucker set out to launch his first rockets and immediately ran into a problem. See, when Zucker moved to England, he didn't change his designs at all. He didn't even change his suppliers. And that meant he still needed German fireworks to launch the thing, and Germany had banned the export of explosives. So you can see how this would be a big problem. But if there's one thing we know about Zucker so far, it's that he never gives up. And he has a solution. He uses his legendary charisma and convinces Mrs. Dombrowski, his business partner's wife, to sneak into Germany, buy his rocket fuel, and smuggle it out in her hat box.
A hat box.
Hatbox. It's a real thing. He's just like, he goes to his business partner's wife and just says like, hey, can you do some like spying for me?
Can you do some under the table shit for me, please?
Unfortunately, Mrs. Dombrowski failed as an international spy and returned empty-handed. Not for lack of trying, though, but because she noticed the goddamn Gestapo were following her.
Well, I mean, this is expected behavior in a police state, you know?
As if there's any shocking.
You can't just go buy explosives. I thought this was America.
It's the story. It's more the weirdness and the wackiness of like,
hey, my business partner's wife, the most expendable person in this relationship. Hey, can you go to this other country and buy explosives from there for me? Thanks.
And like, he puts her through a literal like spy thriller's worth of stress. Like, this is a spy thriller, like sneaking into Germany to like smuggle out some super secret rocket fuel.
Ah, yes, this very large, very obtuse fucking box that's not going to draw any kind of suspicion.
So after putting Mrs. Dombrowski through what sounds like the plot of a Tom Clancy book, he threw in the towel and he just decided to buy British fireworks instead, which literally worked just as good. So that whole mission was for nothing.
Awesome.
As expected. I just love how not thought through this plan was.
Gerhard, have you seen my wife around? Like, I sent her on some errands, don't worry. Meanwhile, she's in another country, like, avoiding the Gestapo.
This makes me think similarly of that one Daredevil dude that built his own rocket, and then when he launched it, like, the parachute fell off immediately.
It's always, I'm biased, it's always the parachutes. It's always the goddamn parachutes.
Are you saying it's because people don't know how to pack parachutes?
It's because people don't think about them. They think it's a napkin with some strings attached.
Are you saying
you got to be careful?
Device that could potentially lead to the death of your entire operation? No.
It is a linchpin.
It's the death of you as the operator.
The whole spy thriller plot line comes to nothing because he just buys British fireworks instead.
Which is bullshit. I was invested in that plot line.
Imagine being Mrs. Dombrowski coming back. She's like,
yeah, it's like, oh, hey, you took too long.
I just went to the gas station down the road and just got him there. Now, Gerhard Zucker's first British flight would take place on June 6th, 1934 in the Sussex Downs. He set up his launch rails, lubed them up with butter, and hauled his 3-foot rocket into place. Butter. Yeah. That's what he used. That was the lubricant he used for his launch rails. He just slathered them in butter. I don't know what you are finding so unbelievable about this. This is a perfectly reasonable thing to do.
Not even, any kind of light oil, just no baby
butter. Yeah.
Just trails.
To keep the story quiet in case it failed, they only had 6 witnesses. And despite everything I've told you about this guy, when Zucker flipped the switch, the rocket flew perfectly. They were even able to recover it and fly it 2 more times that day. So what they did is he built it so that you could swap out the spent rocket cage cartridges and just like shove a new one in.
Oh, that's neat.
It's like the only reasonably inventive thing he ever did. The furthest of these flights flew more than a mile, and between all 3, Zucker was able to launch more than 1,000 letters. Now, his rockets had only been in the air for a few seconds, and the letters went the rest of the way to the post office just by normal mail. But that didn't matter because one of the witnesses of the launch was a reporter for the Daily Express Hartman had sold the exclusive rights to the story to. The next day, the Daily Mail ran the front page headline, "First British Rocket. Syndicate plans 1-minute postal service between Dover and Calais." Which is, he's saying he wants to launch his rockets over the English Channel. And as other newspapers picked up the story and asked him for quotes, Zucker did what he did best and lied his ass off. He said that Friedrich Schmiedel, the hero who would later smash his rockets to keep them out of Nazi hands, actually worked for him and was going to set up the opposite end of a rocket mail network that would blast the letters between England and France. He can't stop lying. He picks another more successful rocket dude and just says yeah, he actually works for me. I taught him everything he knows.
It's just the line never ends.
He just can't help himself. He just can't help but dig this grave deeper and deeper. This guy is a narc. He does not live in the same world. He makes his own world and just forces it on everyone else.
Now, Zucker's new fame brought him a lot of funding from stamp collectors, but it also caught the attention of the British government. They actually commissioned him to fly a rocket a mile over water from Scotland's island of Scarp to the Outer Hebrides. So today, Scarp is completely uninhabited. But back in the 30s, there were still a few people trying to like eke out a living there. And I say eke out because there were no telephones. There was barely any boating, and frequent storms made it impossible to deliver a message by boat. The reason that this is important is because even though barely anyone lived there, it kicked off a massive political scandal in England. Quote, Christina McClellan, who was due to have twins, had a difficult labor and no doctor could be summoned to help her. She eventually had one daughter on Scarp and the second after the weather had died down and she could be evacuated 2 days later in a hospital on the Isle of Lewis. The mother and twins survived, but questions were asked in the House of Parliament about how the Great British Empire could allow its own subjects to live with such primitive communications. Zucker's rocket, a high-tech emergency flare, promised to provide almost instant messages. So this is like the government is embarrassed because there's like no way to get messages to this island in emergencies. And they hire Zucker, the charismatic foreigner, to like solve all their problems.
Perfect.
Like with his last launches, Zucker set up his launch rail and levered his rocket, which he called a Luft torpedo, into place. Unlike his last launches, this one did not go smoothly. Instead of flying a mile over the ocean, his Luft torpedo cleared the rails by a few feet before exploding, sending hundreds of scorched letters everywhere. Here's a picture.
Oh, perfect.
For listeners, you can see in the picture, like they got the perfect picture the moment it exploded.
The mail
and there is
shrapnel.
mail flying out everywhere, like ninja stars of death.
Yeah, it was delivered.
Like you if you were nearby, like you would get like paper cuts all over.
Paper cuts. I think that's paper gouges, if not worse.
Maybe, yeah. And burnt. It's also on fire.
Well, there you go. You trusted the Germans.
So 3 days later, he tried again, this time launching his rocket towards Scarp Island. Sorry, I should have clarified. The first time he launched from Scarp Island towards the Hebrides, and this time he did the other way. And he got the same result. His rocket took off and immediately exploded. Now, you, listener, might think that this was a failure, but you clearly don't have the Sigma grindset brain that Gerhard Zucker did. First off, he insisted it was actually a partial success because a piece of rocket shrapnel managed to make it across over to Scarp Island. Second, these flights made him so much money because even though the rockets were launched for the government, Zucker still filled them with collectible letters for stamp collectors. And when his rockets exploded, the burnt letters sold for more than 10 times as much as the non-burned kind.
This is such a weird niche collection.
It's weird and it rules, and I'm here for it.
It rules in a way that I am not ready for, in that we are cataloging the failures of someone who is, in all likeliness, and all seems to be just a piece of shit.
Yeah.
But lo and behold, they have managed to just ascend to greatness. Mediocre mail delivery practices. God bless.
So the government cut his contract, and Scarp Island never got their emergency 911 rocket. But do you think that stopped our good pal Gerhard Zucker?
No, because the public loves him.
Oh no, the public doesn't love him. They've seen him fail over and over and over. But he took the money he made literally failing forward and used it to keep funding his experiments. He kept trying and failing so many times, the British press nicknamed him the try-again inventor. In late 1934, he tried to launch a rocket from the English mainland to the Isle of Wight, about 3 kilometers away. One of the people in attendance for the launch was 10-year-old Freeman Dyson, who would later go on to become a legendary theoretical physicist. From Dyson, quote, "They set it up with great ceremony on the rather derelict piece of land where we lived, which was sort of a mud flat on the coast opposite the Isle of Wight. They had some dignitaries from London who came down and ceremoniously put this bag of mail with special stamps into the rocket. Then they launched, and the thing zoomed up into the sky very beautifully. But then it turned around and came back almost exactly where it took off and landed with a big splash in the mud. So they went out and retrieved it, and the mail went over by boat."
So what you're saying is they gave it a special stamp, it went up, it fucking died, it came back, it died.
And then we went over to a normal post office. And it like all the rocket did was just make it slightly valuable and delay it.
They sniffed a bit of rocket juice on it and said, yes, this is exactly what I need. God bless.
And it's around this time, like the Nazis before them, that the British government realized they had funded and encouraged a complete madman. First, they tried to convince him to fly his rockets at just an artillery range and far away from people's homes, where it had zero risk of killing anyone. As the Right Honourable Sir Philip Sassoon put it, quote, "The ones tested have shown a remarkable tendency to convey letters to anywhere but their proper destination." When Zucker refused to move his launch site from literally anywhere he wanted to a designated artillery field, the government went with option B. They arrested him and deported him to Germany.
He's your problem again.
It's the only way to stop him. You can't stop him launching rockets, so the only way is to make sure he's not doing it in your country.
Oh yes, the ultimate counter, just make sure he burns down some German hamlets in the process before he gets shot.
He is sabotaging. It's a British attempt to sabotage Nazi Germany by filling it. It's reverse brain drain. They're putting a stupid brain into the German rocket industry.
It's still brain drain, but it's just, artificial.
It's a brain virus.
Introduce the idiocy into the population and watch what happens.
I do need to clarify, the arrest and the deportation were actually separate, but they basically served the same purpose the British government wanted. Technically, he was arrested because he forgot a large amount of explosives in a train station's cloakroom. I do not know the situation that led up to this. He just misplaced about half a ton of rocket fuel, nobody's Nerfex.
Excuse me.
It's just, he just lost it. It's like a cloakroom where, you leave your jacket and whatnot when you go into a show, and you're coming out and it's like, sir, is this your hydrazine, sir? I think you forgot it.
No, that is so much material, not just physically, but volumetrically.
It's a lot.
Also, wait, this is the era of rocket fuel that gets upset if you mildly jostle it, isn't it?
In fairness to him, this was gunpowder. He didn't work with rockets as we know them. He worked with literal fireworks. So this is just cheapy gunpowder. Still very unstable, not something you want to be messing with, but not like nitric acid and dimethylethyl, whatever. Still bad. And while he was in jail for that, the Brits took their opportunity and kicked him out of the country for making counterfeit stamps.
No, wait.
The perfect end to the story of Zucker in England is that he was never allowed to make the stamps that he sold or even mail letters, because in the UK, the post office has the exclusive right to deliver mail. Anyone else doing it is doing it illegally.
This was his Al Capone moment.
The government knew all along what Zucker was doing. Remember, they paid him to deliver mail illegally. Maybe you could make the case that's entrapment. And they knew he was breaking the law, but they turned a blank eye because they wanted him to succeed. They hoped that he would build this cool rocket thing.
Then they could give him any kind of legal
protection. Yeah, waive whatever.
Hey, you actually did what you said you did.
When it became clear he was a chronic liar and failure, and that he was also incredibly dangerous, they had all the ammunition they needed to deport him. So in 1936, he returned to his home country of Germany, went to visit his parents, and was immediately arrested by the Gestapo.
Uh-oh. What are they going to do with him?
I shouldn't be laughing and reveling in the experience of anyone being arrested by the goddamn Gestapo, but this guy deserves it more than most.
I wouldn't say more than most, because there are a lot of people who deserve it before him, but at the same time...
Yeah, but most of them would be literal Nazis. Most of them would be in the Gestapo.
Exactly, people before him, but he's also just a fucking idiot and deserves to be in the same line.
We're going to get to more of that, because this is also where the story gets a little bit weird, because there are multiple versions of these events, and it's all because Gerhard Zucker is a chronic liar.
He's flooding the zone with shit.
He's the Jim Leahy of rocket designers.
I'm going to start off by telling you his main story, and then I'm going to tell you another story, and we can compare them. According to Zucker, he was arrested for high treason and was nearly executed for, quote, an attempt to steal an invention important to Germany to a foreign power. But he was cleverly able to dodge the noose by claiming that a German citizen was at every one of his launches, and this person could prove no secrets had been exchanged. And this was like technically true, but there were some problems. And the first was that the German citizen in question was his friend Robert Hartmann, who I want to remind you was a famous Jewish anti-Nazi radical.
This person that the government tacitly hates.
Yeah, and Zucker's just like, don't worry, he was with me. He can vouch for me.
This story just gets worse every time you open your mouth.
It's immediately going to get worse. Second, Hartmann believed Zucker was dead. I know this is true because it shows up in Hartmann's biography instead of Zucker's. Right after he got arrested, Zucker sent his friend a letter that basically read like he was being led to the gallows and would die fighting the evil Nazis. He sends his best friend or his friend a letter that just says like, I'm dead and I'm going to die a hero. Remember me. That's Zucker's story that he wrote later.
Yeah, so Zuck the Sock.
Hartmann's biography is weird because I read the relevant sections. He doesn't seem to like feel betrayed because there are sections where he says like, yeah, I thought Zucker was dead. I was convinced he was killed by the evil Nazis and went down fighting. And then he just turned up later and, we hung out.
I thought we were besties.
Here's the more realistic story. Quote, newspaper cuttings tell a different story of Zucker's fate. He served just under 16 months in prison, they say, for fraud and embezzlement, accused of selling stamps for 2 rocket launches in Belgium that never took place. Zucker was freed with one condition, that he never touch a rocket again. I love that. I love that he's just like, dude, we will let you out of prison. You just have to promise this one time, not in Germany, not in England, not anywhere you go, never touch a rocket, please.
You're too stupid for your own survival. Just please stop. We don't want you to kill yourself. I hope not.
So,
I sincerely
did he listen?
And he did actually kind of listen for a while. He didn't play with rockets. He didn't do any weird experiments. In fact, there's basically no info on anything he did for the next few years, from like 1936 until 1939. And because something happened in 1939. Do you want to guess what that was?
Gee, I wonder what's going on in Poland.
And do you want to guess what this man, whose best friend was an anti-Nazi radical and who had his rocket dreams smashed by the Nazis, did?
What did he do?
He joined the party and joined the Luftwaffe for the whole war.
Was he going to send mail to fucking Poznan as it's getting besieged?
he was a bomber. He was a bomber crewman. Yeah, like he joins the Luftwaffe right at the start of the war, and he serves all the way through until 1944 when he is horrifically injured and sat out the rest of the war in a hospital, which is also where he charmed his future wife with stories of being a V2 inventor.
Congratulations, you started as a shitheel.
He rules. I alternate between hating him and loving him depending on who he's scamming and lying to. Like, when he's lying to normal people, I hate him. When he is actively tricking and fooling the Nazis, I love him. He's using his superpower for good.
No, he's not using it for good. He's using it to be a fucking idiot and avoiding the death he deserves.
I don't have a lot of info on what he did during the war, but he gets horrifically wounded. And this is back in the time when like injuries can be given like a percentage. He is labeled 70% invalid for like how fucked up he gets whenever he's like presumably gets shot down.
Awesome, let's crank that percentage up.
Exactly. Like, all right, let's get the next 30.
The brain is obviously non-functional. Where do we go next?
Oh, after the war, while America was busy paperclipping as many real rocket scientists as it could find, Zucker started his new life as a furniture salesman in West Germany. And that is where I'd leave things, with Zucker living out his days, never touching a rocket again. But someone brings him back for one last job. Someone we know from our other episodes. And that someone is Nikita Sergeyevich Khrushchev.
Oh no. The shitheel is back!
I think everything in space, in one way or another, comes back to Nikita Khrushchev. And I intend to prove that through all of these episodes, because it has disastrous consequences right now. After the launch of Sputnik and the start of the space race, Germany was looking for a local space hero that they could point to that hadn't been grabbed by the Americans or Soviets. Like they wanted to, in the same way that the French and the British and Canadians and everyone, they wanted to get in on this race, and they needed a guy they could point to. And somehow, despite everything they knew about him, like the government knew he was a fraud, Zucker was who they picked, and it made him an overnight star. Like they lionize his old rocket failures. They write the same stories that he does. They pretend he's some incredible rocket pioneer.
Rocket enthusiast never gives up, despite the odds.
They set him up as a huge rocket pioneer hero. They put out special stamps that on the anniversaries of his launches. Like actually, like the government puts out official stamps commemorating him. And the new fame encouraged him to get back into rocket mail. Quote, "This was just playing around," he wrote in his CV. He failed to mention that on Ascension Day 1964, this playing around brought him into the headlines once again, when another of his rockets exploded, scattering shrapnel over the crowd of spectators and killing 2 schoolboys. Zucker served a 6-month prison sentence for involuntary manslaughter. It was the 3rd time rockets had landed him behind bars. And the West German government consequently banned all civil rocket experiments. So, bit of a grim turn at the end. But I think that is a good place to leave it. Gerhard Zucker never touched rockets again and lived until 1965, continuing to write memoirs about how he was the true unappreciated father of modern rocketry and how he had been snubbed of the fame that he deserved. So, how are we all feeling?
The man is an idiot.
I'm glad that we can get off of Mr. Zucker's wild ride
for,
finally.
Maybe a semi-stable ride.
No, it's a gut punch at the end. He killed 2. This is where he kills 2 kids. This is also related to everything about Zucker being hard to confirm. Wikipedia says 3. Some sources say 1. The most sources that I have found agree on 2. But again, this is something that is like it's so up in the air with this guy.
I still find it stupid that, congratulations, the man managed to get away with all of this stupidity before, with only 2 fatalities to his name. Because what he was essentially doing is lighting off tin cans full of rocket fuel and letters and going, yes, this is perfect.
They were basically frag bombs, yeah. He served collectively over everything. Like he served less than a year in prison if you put together all of his different sentences.
That's obscene.
That is obscene.
If you manslaughter 2 children today, you're there for 40 years.
And they knew him. They the West German government did not have any excuse to not know this would happen.
I'm sure this was the PR win that West German government was looking forward to.
I could make jokes here, but I kind of don't want to, because not only 2 schoolboys, and you read these stories, a lot of Freeman Dyson, literally a legendary theoretical physicist, was 10, and he went out and he watched one of these things. These 2 kids were around the same age doing exactly the same thing Freeman Dyson did. And they're going out to watch a cool rocket launch got them killed. Or Gerhard Zucker, more accurately, got them killed.
And that's the thing. As a mode of mail transportation, it is tacitly shitty.
All this time we've been focused on the history, we never really stopped to think that it is an incredibly stupid way to deliver mail.
No, trust me, that was
it is so energy inefficient. It's so prone to exploding. How do you know you're going to hit the field? What happens if you landed in someone's house?
It's, as you said, it is energy inefficient. Absolutely. The Guardian.
Think about how much butter you have to use.
Oh, too much. It's also a horrific accuracy. It's also completely intracontinental because, well, what proper nation is going to actually give up its missile guidance systems? You have that in play as well.
It's like I said earlier, if you equate this in the modern day, you can't really tell what the rocket is if you're in a position where you need to quickly shoot it down. So it's here's my intercontinental cargo mail rocket. Oh, is it mail cargo or a nuclear warhead? You decide, NORAD.
It'd be that Soviet dude, except every single week. I think we covered a good number of stories. We talked about space failures. We talked about scams. We talked about Nazis, and we talked about a liar, a con man, and an idiot. Like I said before, I don't even know if I can call him a con man because he lied to people, but he didn't do it in the service of like getting rich or getting famous. He did it, it seems, through a like obscene amount of self-confidence and his like a willingness to just literally do like maybe he's even kind of like Werner von Braun like that, because von Braun did the exact same thing. He set his morals aside and did horrific shit.
He was a bullshit artist, not a con artist. He knew what he could do.
That's fair.
But he was just able to bullshit his way through multiple governments on end.
Right.
Thank you for listening to Failure to Launch. If you enjoyed the show, please leave us a review or tell a friend. Everything helps. If you want to follow us, contact us, or suggest a topic, you can email us at launchfailurepodcast@gmail.com. We're also on Twitter at launch_failure. Failure to Launch is hosted on Anchor, and we post on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. We also post our episodes with visual aids on YouTube at Failure to Launch. All music was provided by DJ Danarchy.